Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Glad that you could return for another segment. In this segment, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Daphne Chan. Dr. Chan is head of Dermatology Medical Affairs at Janssen. She's going to discuss a first-of-its-kind, large-scale clinical study in dermatology, 100% dedicated to Black, Hispanic, Asian, Indigenous, and other people of color living with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Chan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation, Neil. Nice to be here.
Well, give us a bit of your background information and talk about your role as head of dermatology at Janssen briefly.
Sure, happy to do so. So I'm currently the head of Dermatology Medical Affairs at Janssen Immunology. In this role, I am responsible for leading a team of clinicians, dermatologists, and scientists who are focused on conducting phase 3-4 clinical trials that are designed to address unmet needs that we identify to deserve more research in the post-approval setting. In our roles as well, we also contribute important clinical insights to inform our ongoing phase 2-3 clinical R&D development programs of new unapproved investigational therapies. And then finally, we also contribute significant efforts to producing scientific materials and education materials with the goal of helping to increase disease awareness and more broadly communicate new data and evidence that we identify to be helpful potentially to inform clinical practice. And then finally, as for my background, I'm a clinical pharmacologist by training, and I have both clinical development, R&D, and medical affairs development experience in the pharma industry for over 17 years.
For those who may not be familiar with psoriasis and its causes and effects, tell us a bit about psoriasis and specifically how the disease impacts people of color.
Happy to do so. So plaque psoriasis is the most common form of psoriasis, and psoriasis is also a very common dermatological condition that impacts people. Psoriasis is an immune disease that results in an acceleration of skin cell growth. And on lighter skin, what psoriasis can look like is they would look like typically as raised red patches that are covered with silvery white scales. And these are really the dead skins that are accumulating on top of your skin. On darker skin, however, these plaques may appear darker and thicker, and they could also appear more violaceous, such as having a more purplish, reddish-brown, reddish-purple, or even darker coloration. And so just by that description alone, you can see that patients who have lighter skin tone psoriasis and darker skin tone psoriasis could look completely different in our eyes. Now, because psoriasis can look different on the skin of color, this could result in patients themselves not recognizing that they may have the condition. And then also for healthcare providers, if they haven't been trained specifically to recognize and to treat psoriasis in skin of color, they may also have less experience in recognizing the presentation of psoriasis in people of color. Overall, there is also an under-recognition that the prevalence of psoriasis in people of color is low. And this is actually not true. So the prevalence of psoriasis in people of color can range depending on the background of the type of people of color. So it could be 1.5% in African Americans, 1.9% is in Hispanics, or 2.5% in Asian population. And these are the best but probably still limited epidemiological evidence we have. And this is compared to 3.5% of Caucasians who we know of having psoriasis. So because of the under-recognition and the under-education of what psoriasis can look like among people of color versus those of Caucasian descent, you can see that overall we are probably even underestimating the prevalence of psoriasis in people of color. So if I may further add to that, just in the broader context, because overall medical education has less representation of people of color, and we're less educated about how to recognize the condition. Overall, there is an underdiagnosis or delayed diagnosis among people of color with the condition, and therefore also a lower likelihood for patients to receive treatment of advanced therapies.
Well, give us a bit of background on the VISIBLE study. I mentioned that Janssen recently launched a first-of-its-kind study in dermatology dedicated to people of color. Give us some background and talk about why Janssen decided to create the study in the first place. You've given us lots of information about some of the statistics, but why were we looking for this information?
Right, that's a great question. So at Janssen, we are working to set a new standard where diverse populations are fully represented to the extent that we can in our clinical trials as we continue to work in advancing care for all patients, no matter who you are and where you come from and what you look like. So VISIBLE is a first-of-its-kind, large-scale prospective study that is designed specifically to understand and characterize moderate to severe plaque psoriasis among the many different types of people of color that you have already mentioned earlier. So it is our intention that we are designing the study to help create a more equitable and inclusive research process, and then with the broader intentions that we can approach enrollment, retention, and diagnosis differently, and we can have broader community engagement. We can provide investigator training and support, as well as studying outcome measures that may have more unique impact to the understanding of psoriasis in skin of color. Overall, we hope that at the end of the day, our research findings will be able to provide patients and physicians with new information that can help contribute to breaking down barriers for patients to access advanced treatments, including biologic treatments in people of color living with psoriasis. I'll be happy to talk more in specific details on certain aspects of the design of our study, as well as our thought process.
Well, as far as the study findings and what Janssen's hope is, why is diversity in clinical trials so important in the first place? Is there a huge unmet need when it comes to educating healthcare providers and researchers about the different cultural aspects of people of color?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look back at the research that has been conducted, whether it is interventional or observational, and not just in dermatology, but across most of our therapeutic areas, I think we recognize and see now that most of this research is conducted in people of Caucasian descent or even and very little representation of diverse populations. We have begun recognizing this issue, and we, in the industry as well as in academia, have begun contributing a more intentional effort to identify diverse populations that should be represented in the study. Because at the end of the day, when we are all patients, when we ourselves are diagnosed with certain conditions, and think about what will happen if we do not see people who look like us or who we connect with or identify with to have the disease that is under study. So it is incredibly important for all of us to contribute and to put an intentional focus and effort into being more inclusive in conducting any type of research that should really involve a more representative population. And psoriasis is only one of these many examples.
Well, I appreciate you joining us here on Health Professional Radio this morning, Dr. Chan. Lots of great information, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Neil.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Daphne Chan. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.